You've just fobbed that guy off in the audience who asked for an apology, and in doing so, you've fobbed off the whole country.
No, Josh.
A full apology.
Josh. Did Boris do too little, too late?
So I'm assuming, Anil, you were referring to the report that has come out just at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Yeah. Baroness Hallett's report, first of a number on the COVID inquiry. Her conclusion was the government response was too little, too late. Imposing a lockdown a week earlier in March 2020 could have saved 23,000 lives, according to some modelling in England. And she talked about a toxic and chaotic culture at the heart of the government led by Boris Johnson. Do you agree?
So COVID was a global pandemic of proportions we've never seen before. It was unprecedented. And the government of the time made a series of decisions based on advice. It made the decisions it thought was right at the time. Now, some people thought we should have locked down earlier, and that's what this report, with hindsight, finds, and I accept the report. But quite a lot of people thought we locked down too harshly. Our measures were too harsh. Now, I respect a number of views at that time about how we should deal with it. But I do also ask that people respect the government did what it thought was right.
What about these comments about a toxic and chaotic culture at the heart of government? What's your response to that?
Undoubtedly
actively encouraged by Boris
Johnson, went on at number 10 that should not have gone on. I am not going to defend some of those things that we knew about at the time, by the way. But this report does find that in some cases there was no good decision, right decision to make. And it also finds fault with all devolved nations in Britain as well. So the Scottish government under the SNP and the Welsh government under Labour, as well as the UK government under the Conservatives. But what we must do is ensure that we actually learn the lessons that this COVID inquiry is providing for us, so that, God forbid, this should ever happen again, whoever is in government are fully prepared and those mistakes are not repeated. And if we revert to using this for political point scoring, we will have failed those people, not only who lost their lives, but have lived with the consequences ever after.
Let me just ask you, I mean, you kind of answered, but I just want to be completely clear. When Baroness Hallett, this is her second report, incidentally, not her first, when she talks about a toxic and chaotic culture at the heart of government, and with Boris Johnson failing to tackle that culture and sometimes actively encouraging it, do you agree with that?
I accept the results of her inquiry. I'm not going to defend that culture that she has identified. But what I would say is that the government at the time took decisions in good faith and includes things like a vaccine rollout, which she commended, by the way, which was a vaccine developed in this country and which was then used around the world. So there were certainly some good outcomes from the way that the government dealt with it. And she does find, Baroness Hallett does find fault of all the devolved nations, but this shouldn't be used as party political point scoring. I accept the results of the inquiry in full.
I think one doesn't know how one will behave in a pandemic until one finds oneself in a pandemic. And that, like you say, it was the same for every government having to deal with it. However, I think we were in the very unfortunate position of having Boris Johnson in charge at the time, where he... I remember him taking, I'm going to call it a dishevelled approach to the whole thing, boasting about shaking hands with patients with COVID and then getting COVID himself and almost dying, which is incredibly serious. But, you know, our Prime Minister should have been, A, protecting himself from all that because he was our leader of our country, etc., etc. And we know that, you know, as the pandemic rolled on, there were some very choice decisions that were made. I mean, now looking back, Eat Out to Help Out looks like a farce. It looks like a farcical thing that you would put in a sort of B-movie, you know. We're going through a pandemic. It's spread by having contact with other people. It's damaging the economy. Right, everybody go and have lunch together with a £5 off. I mean, it looks so ridiculous now. Apparently, Chris Whitty called it Eat Out to help the virus out. And then, of course, there were the PPE sort of debacle. So I think, you know, I think there were a lot of very dubious behaviours going on. Like I say, you know, next time round, maybe we'll get it better. But I think our greatest fault was having Boris in charge at that time.
Man at the very back.
I don't accept your half-hearted apology from the handling of the COVID pandemic. We saw ourselves the data coming out of China, out of North Italy, with lots of people dying a day. Can you just say something and just say sorry for all of the lives that were lost during the pandemic?
I mean, you weren't in government at the time, but you are here representing the former government.
Yeah, and we're not talking about a report that is calling on me or the Conservative Party today to apologise for spending £350 billion to ensure that 4 million people remained employed throughout the pandemic. A rollout of a vaccine scheme which was probably the best, most well-delivered in the world. And by the way, we delivered that because we didn't have to follow EU rules. But I am not going to stick up for, and I've made it absolutely clear, I am not defending some of the things that went on in number 10, some of that culture which the report identifies. I do not defend any of that, but I wasn't part of it. I wasn't part of the Johnson government.
Joe, you've just fobbed that guy off in the audience who asked for an apology, and in doing so, you've fobbed off the whole country.
No, Josh.
A full
no,
apology.
Josh. What I've said, the worst thing that could come out of this
You've had your chance to speak, and I'm going to continue. Not only have you fobbed off the guy who's just asked this question for an apology, you fobbed off the whole country who have been utterly let down by the way in which the Conservative government managed this situation. And it is laid bare in this report. Toxic, sexist culture in number 10 Downing Street. I was out there vaccinating people against the pandemic. I trained up as a volunteer with St John Ambulance. My partner Connor was out in A&E working with people on ventilators to try to combat this. Key workers went out every single day in order to try to get our country through this. And we were utterly let down and undermined by the government at every turn. Boris Johnson should be hauled into Downing Street for one last Downing Street press conference to apologise to the whole country, and he should be banned from holding public office ever again in light of these failures that he's brought upon our country.
So throughout the whole of the pandemic, I worked for a national healthcare charity. I saw how bad it was. My sister is a nurse, and she worked throughout on the wards, actually just near where you are, Josh, throughout, and my father-in-law is a retired GP. I am fully aware of how difficult it was. The government at the time made key decisions about jobs, about locking down in good faith, using the advice of health professionals. Now, I accept in full the results of the inquiry. But if we're going to use this to blame Conservatives, when the report is very clear that Labour in Wales and the SNP in Scotland also got things wrong, then I think we're failing the future generations who need us to learn from the outcomes and implement the recommendations. So whoever's in government, and it might be, God forbid, because we don't want it ever to happen again, it might be a Labour government, they have learnt from this and are not looking to just score points against governments and prime ministers who are gone.
I don't think you can call it point scoring. I think that's really offensive to the people who suffered because of lack of government listening to advice and not shutting down early enough. The 25,000 people that could have been saved, that is not point scoring.
I've just been accused of fobbing a gentleman off. I'm not fobbing anyone off. As I said, I work for a national healthcare charity throughout COVID.
You've said. Thank you. Yes, woman here.
I do actually think that you should apologise because people did vote for you, and what you just said about spending billions, like we should be grateful. It's hard-working taxpayers' money that you spent without sort of real consultation. So I do think that people are owed an apology. And also during the pandemic, you were still allowing people to come in on aeroplanes right the way through, because I know people that came. So why didn't you shut that down? We do need an apology, I think.
Do you want, listen, two people have asked you now if you want to apologise on behalf of the former government. Do you want to do that or not?
I'm not going to apologise on behalf of a government that I wasn't part of, but I'm not defending the mistakes that were identified. I'm not seeking to. I do not defend the culture in number 10 that the report identifies. All I ask for is that we ensure that the lessons are learned, and they're not just words, that we actually learn the lessons, and we make sure that our country and our healthcare system is more resilient if this should ever happen again, regardless of who is in power.
I'm not entirely sure that anyone really cares how good you were at the pandemic, how good you were at vaccinating, what you guys personally did during the pandemic. It's like bordering on a little bit egotistical here, when actually, in fact, the thing about this inquiry is that, you know, it makes it sound like the only solution was to lock down harder and faster, completely ignoring the massive cost, not just 350 billion, which, you're right, as if we should be thankful for it, was because you locked down for so long, with that you had to support people with so much money. This is completely losing sight of how damaging lockdown was for so many people, young people. You know, it was a horrendous policy that went on for far, far too long. And the
Ella, it does also suggest, just reading it this afternoon, is that if some preventative measures, not lockdown, had been taken earlier, lockdowns might have been avoided altogether.
Yeah, the rule of six and all of that, which, you know, I have to say, the thing about Boris Johnson is, the only good thing about Boris Johnson was that he had just a tiny smidgen that lasted for about 3 seconds of a bit of a sense of sort of liberty and civil liberties in him, which I think was just positive for a minute, because I think he understood the consequences of what would happen if you shut down society. And the fact that the government was initially sort of nervous about doing that was, if it wasn't positive, it was important, because I think what's happened with this inquiry is we've lost complete sight of the damages that lockdown brought, and the damages that are still being reaped, whether it's, we've had discussions, we're endlessly having discussions about mental health. Rachel Reeves in her sort of discussions about the budget keeps dropping the P word, pandemic, for how much of a problem it was. If we come out of this inquiry thinking that the only solution to any future pandemic is to shut down society instantly, then we have failed, because we're not recognising the consequences of that action. And the inquiry itself refused to take on board any cost-benefit analysis of what happened with lockdown. We still don't have answers to that. And it's a balancing act, isn't it? Nobody wants people to die, and that's a very serious thing to take into consideration. What measures do you take with that? I also don't think, do any of us sit here want to see lockdown happen again and have people kept from work and have people, in misery at home, have the kind of costs that are related to that? Do you? Surely you don't. So, coming out of this and taking on board from this inquiry the idea that lockdown was just a really great thing that should have happened quicker and sooner and faster is nonsense. And it's not at all what the public think, by the way.
Well, let's hear what's on the public think. Woman here in the front.
The report highlighted today that there were sections of our society that were disproportionately affected by COVID, namely those that are the most low paid, and also black and ethnic minority communities as well were disproportionately affected by COVID. And that's come out in the report today that you've said that you accept in its full entirety. So therefore, was that toxic culture within 10 Downing Street perpetuating inequalities within society? This report says so.
Let me get round a few more people first. Yes, woman next to you.
Yeah, I'm just wondering where the compassion is in this room tonight, really. We're looking at 25,000 lives that could have been
23,000.
23,000.
Some people question the modelling, but that's the modelling that the report is using.
Thousands of lives that could have been saved. People are still grieving over that, and we have a brag list of how much spending was done during the pandemic. No. I think it's all wrong.
I'll come back to you. I'll just hear some more people. Yes, man in the check shirts with the glasses. Yeah.
As it's been mentioned that the hindsight is a wonderful thing, but at the same time, what we should learn from this report is the fact that it's been reported correctly, and lessons learned is also been mentioned. Boris, for all his faults, one thing he did push through was the vaccine, because he's never been a detail man. He couldn't control those kind of details that So I'm glad that the lessons learned are carried on. Although the pandemic is every 100 years, whatever they say, these are written down and logged for future, if ever happens.
Man in the black top.
Yeah, I don't think trying to beg for an apology from the gentleman up there, it serves any purpose whatsoever. That's been and gone. I think as an electorate, it's our responsibility to appoint people who are far more competent at handling themselves and crises than the gross negligence and incompetence that has gone before, with people like Johnson, Sunak, Dominic Raab, all those muppets, just a waste of time. Like, you know, they wouldn't be in any company worth their weight. And that's the thing as an electorate we need to learn, to appoint better quality people with bigger, better ideas.
All right. Well, we haven't heard from you, Stephen, yet.
Yeah, I do think, I think to the lady's point down the front here, it is, we should take a moment just to reflect on the tragedy of COVID and the number of people who lost their lives and families who've been bereaved. And I think it's just heartbreaking. And these reports come out and I think it just reminds us of that time and how difficult it was. And I think it's also the trauma. I think the country is still traumatized in many, many ways. Deep scars left, particularly in our young people, I think. So young people who should be out there socializing with their friends, people who maybe are at university who couldn't go. And those are deep scars that we need to get over. So I think we just need to reflect on that as a country. And I think it's an opportunity for us to also come together and reflect on that. Lessons learned. I mean, there's one deep lesson for me, which is the damage that austerity did to our public services. Our health and care workers were amazing. Everybody remembers standing on the doorsteps and applauding them and what heroes they were. But our public services had been left very vulnerable and exposed, so that when something big came along like COVID, we were lacking in resilience. So there's a big lesson here to learn, which is why I think it's really important, you know, that the Chancellor has said one thing we won't be doing in this government is having a return to austerity. We've got to rebuild our public services, not just for the business as usual as delivering for our people, but also to be ready for this kind of crisis that could come down the track. And finally, just on lessons learned, as a government, we ran a cross-departmental pandemic preparedness exercise in the autumn, and a report and a strategy is now being drafted, which will be published next year, to set out how we, as a government, but as a nation, should ensure that we are ready for the eventuality that we might have another pandemic. So we absolutely are using these inquiries as an opportunity to learn lessons and to be prepared for the future.